or whatever. My grandmother was a devout Methodist, and there was always a picture of John Wesley somewhere in the house. And I'm sure that we heard over and over John Wesley's admonition that the goal in life was to earn, save, and give. And so I remember that. Then I grew up in Odessa. Thank you for the musical tribute to my youth. And I remember the people, they weren't homeless then because there were flop houses, but I remember being somewhat fascinated with the people down at the Pray to Eat missions and going over and visiting with them, and occasionally convincing them to buy me a quart of beer because I was underage at the time. I spent my 20s in the university, in the Navy, at Harvard getting an MBA. And in my 30s and my early 40s, I concentrated on the oil business and making my modest fortune, if you will. By my late 40s and 50s, I began to think about responsibilities to those who are less fortunate and the need to give back.
So, Mack, I know you also have an undergraduate degree in philosophy, and I think that could have been important in your decisions in life. What actually activated your sense of responsibility? It's one thing to have that background, it's another thing to do something.
Well, I'm now not a very good Episcopalian, but I believe in prayer. But moreover, I believe you've got to do something. And I do remember, Joy, as we were putting these thoughts together, a Christmas Eve, coming out of a Christmas Eve service at Christ Church, and I remember it being a bitterly cold night. We used to have those. And we were heading back home for a Christmas Eve dinner. And I had on a pretty substantial overcoat. I remember it was substantial because we used to live in New York City, and that's where I bought it, and so it was a lot thicker than your Houston overcoat. And I guess the story would be better if I told you it was snowing. It may have been. But after the church service, I saw a person on the sidewalk lying down, maybe asleep, with no cover. And I get a little emotional, sorry, but I said to myself, this is just wrong. So I took my coat off and put it on him. And I hoped there was some money in the pocket. So Joy, what brought you to New Hope?
Well, it was nice. It's not nearly as dramatic a story as that. Or as emotional. It's just a really happy accident.
My wife always tells me not to cry.
Oh, that's go right ahead. So I spent my first career with the Cullen family oil operating company, Quintana Petroleum, in a fairly senior management position, and then there came an oil downturn. I don't know how many of you remember that. We all said it would never happen in Houston, but it did at one point. And so there was a brief sabbatical, and I was in South Carolina, and I came back to Texas, and by that time, the oil business had changed, and so had I, and I had certainly watched the philanthropic work of the family that owned that company. And I thought, I just really would like to do something that seems meaningful, that seems impactful. And as I was looking for a position, I kept hearing about this job at Christ Church Cathedral and about this mission that they had started. And I thought it sounded wonderful, but not for me. I was planning to work in the medical center. That seemed more in line with my background, or maybe the arts. I've always been a ballet main, and that seemed good. And then one day, the dean of the cathedral then, and we will mention his name because New Hope Housing is his idea, Dean Walter Taylor. He called me because he was tired of hearing about Joy Horak-Brown, who never called him because she wasn't interested. And he left me the most charming voicemail. And I thought, I'm not interested in this mission, but I want to meet this person. And so I made an appointment, and when my interview came, it was Friday afternoon, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was cold, and it was raining, and I didn't want to go. But I'm a cradle Catholic, and I knew that if I called the priest with an excuse, he would know that I had lied. It's true. It's absolutely true, and so I went. And I remember that we talked for 3 hours. I remember at one point Walter got up and called his wife Mary and said, I'm going to be late for dinner. And when I left his office, the dean's office, I thought, well, this is my job. I have got to have this job, which paid nothing, you understand, and I had been looking for a real job. I don't quite know what came over me, but I know particularly when I went and saw one of those 40 studio efficiency apartment homes, I thought, you know, if the worst thing that ever happens to me is I live here, I can do this. This is just fine. And at that point, the bones were pretty bare, but they were good bones that the organization had. And having come out of the oil business, and senior management was always lovely to me then, but when it came to your peers, your own age group, they were all guys, and women weren't as welcome in the workplace as they are today, though we still have a ways to go. And so I had some lessons in succeeding in adversity. And I thought, I think I could apply those lessons because I knew immediately this wasn't necessarily a popular mission, and it was going to take a while. So let's talk about our organizing elements, Mac, because there are several organizing elements that I think have been important in the success that New Hope has enjoyed thus far.
We've got an outline here, so this will go okay. The word that comes to mind about New Hope's mission is that it happened here in Houston, Texas, and that everybody in this room can look at each other and thank themselves because of the generosity of this city. And Joy and I have been either together or on our own to major cities in the state of Texas, in California, in the Northeast. And let me tell you, there is nothing like Houston, Texas, and the generosity of the city. And just to underline that, the buildings that Bob was talking about a minute ago, they now cost us $40 to $50 million to put up. So you can multiply 40 or 50 times 15, 16 buildings that have been put together. And that doesn't happen, particularly with almost no debt, without extraordinary generosity and cooperation from individuals, from foundations, from the state and housing programs that Joy has been able to bend sometimes to our benefit, and to the city and national sources. So the success is built on generosity.
Well, it is, and it's also built on persistence. The persistence of all of those who put their shoulder behind this. It is not always a popular mission. We built a brand, and I think that's been very helpful. It's the first thing I started working on when I sat down in my office. There was a logo back then, and it looked like a little doghouse with a dove flying over it. And I did, and I told a very active board member at the time that I wasn't going to sign a letter with that logo on it, and I meant it. And she stepped up and signed all of the letters for all the grant proposals until we had a new logo, which took several months. And it's pretty much the logo that you see today. But I immediately thought, this is going to have to be the gold standard. And people are going to need to understand that, or we are never going to get anywhere. And then we need to couple that with persistence, because in fact, in 2005, when we opened a building, it was $4.5 million, the entire building, all the furniture in it, the computers, the phones, the whole thing. And it's closer to $45 million today. And the economics are difficult. The single room occupancy apartments we have, individuals have an income of less than $800 a month. Less than $800 a month. And the working families, the head of household, typically $33,000, $44,000 a year. Gross income, not net income. And so those are the people we work with, right, Matt?
That's absolutely true. And another element that we, working together, have managed, sometimes with full disclosure and sometimes without, is taking risk. My experience in the Navy taught me the difference between really important stuff and just stuff. And I was on a ship for 2.5 years. I was head of division of about 30 men on the ship. I was lucky enough to be an underway officer of the deck. So I had to command when the captain wasn't on the bridge, and the ship was USS Yorktown, an aircraft carrier. That was a lot of responsibility in my early 20s. Then I volunteered to go to Vietnam, where I was a Black Beret, I was in combat, and let me just assure you, if you want to figure out where you can get clarity and calm and focus in order to survive, you get into combat. So we learned how to take risks carefully, but with risk, and that's another critical part of the success that you build.
And that many of us here in the room have built together. So what are you proudest of, Matt?
Well, it has to be that the immediate thought is that we have provided housing for individuals that didn't have a place to live, didn't have a decent place to live. If you can imagine leaving this event and not having a place to go where you live. So the number one thing is providing housing for people. But maybe on top of that is that we have been able to create an institution, a sustainable institution that's going to be here and fill a need that's not going to go away. Houston's going to need a New Hope housing, and New Hope housing is going to be here regardless of what happens.
So I guess you'd like to know what I'm proudest of. Is that the next part? Okay. I was just wondering. Is it my turn?
I don't know who typed this, but there isn't a transition.
Well, I'm just waiting
but I know how to do it. What are you proudest of?
Well, okay. I think first of all, it's the people. Most importantly, the people who have lived in our buildings and still do. People who are struggling to stabilize their lives or advance their lives. People, they're the folks you read about when you read the Kinder Institute at Rice University studies. The people who don't have $400 for an emergency. Think about that when you leave here today and a tire goes out in one of the potholes or whatever, and it's not an inconvenience, it's a disaster. In those circumstances, that's about 50% of Houstonians. Almost 30% of Houstonians are food insecure. 50% of Houstonians rent the place where they live, and half of the renters pay more than 30% of their gross income, not net, on rent. And when your income isn't very large in the first place, that 30% is a harder bite than it would be for many of us in the room. So I'm proud of those people who are working to stabilize and advance their lives. And I'm proud of the staff. This is where I have a problem. There's so many. I'm New Hope's first employee. The second, third, and fourth employees are in the room today. because this was not the most attractive mission. So much snazzier to be a part of some other missions over time. And one thing that occurs to me that's been very helpful is that, I've been doing this. January will be 30 years. Mac will be, kind of 28 by that time. And so there is a group of us. We're not the only ones. There are others who have been with the mission for a very long time. And when you have a startup, having a group of people who work together just about as seamlessly as human beings are able to work together, and who stick with something for a long period of time, you have a chance of making something happen. A mature organization, maybe that's not the best prescription, but it has been for creating new housing. The people and the generosity of stakeholders. There are stakeholders who have funded New Hope Housing since before I joined, and are still doing so. So many of you are in this room, lots of you are in this room, and I hope that you feel really proud of what you've done.
I understand Spicer has to pay more if we don't wind this up and get out of here. But I'm just telling you, we're standing on your shoulders. Thank you for everything that everyone in this room has done to create New Hope Housing, and please keep helping us create it. Thank you.
Thank you.